I'm so pleased you've joined us for another After Dinner Leadership podcast episode. My guest today is Dan Pontefract, and he's an author and speaker, and he has just published his fifth book, Work, Life, Bloom. We talk a lot about agriculture and its links to leadership, and he is very keen to debunk some myths that we use a lot in management speak. Have you ever heard or used the term work-life balance? Have you ever used the term employee engagement? Well, he proclaims that they are both myths, and we talk about why that's the case. So take a listen and see if you agree. Now, the good news is there's always room around this dinner table for more people. So please share, subscribe, and pass this on to someone who you think would enjoy our after dinner leadership conversation. A warm welcome then to Dan Pontefract. Welcome, Dan, to our After Dinner Leadership podcast.
Hi, Simon. Thanks for having me on this show before, during, and after dinner. I love this.
It's good to have you with us. And where are you calling in from?
I'm in what we call God's country, Simon. It's the left or the best coast of Canada. It's Victoria, British Columbia, the capital of our fine province of British Columbia. Population about 450,000 people. And what many say, because it is named after Queen Victoria I, it's a little bit of England, which is just like me. I'm a little bit of England. Yeah.
Well, that's lovely. I've only been to Vancouver Airport. That's as far as I got. I need to explore a bit further. I was on a transfer to Asia, but yeah, one day. I've heard wonderful things about both BC and Vancouver. Yeah, look forward to that.
It's very good. We've immigrated from other parts of Canada, my wife and I, to the West Coast, and it's quite lovely. So we'd love to have you. Come over for a pint.
Thanks, Dan. And one of the traditions we have is to ask a series of quick fire questions. You've got 1 minute, and I'm just going to ask you some quick questions just to find a little bit more about you. Are you ready for those?
Bald. Was the first question? Like, what's your hair color? Bald. No? Yes, I'm ready. Let's go.
Actually, funnily enough, here we go. Okay, name.
Daniel Frederick Pontefract.
Organization.
Pontefract Group, recovering still.
Current position.
Author, CEO, head dad of the family.
What's the best piece of advice you've received?
Always wear underwear, but the more serious one, of course, is my network is my net worth.
Who inspires you?
Oh, my wife.
Why
Denise Lamarche. French, incredibly astute, empathetic. I've learned so much about how to be a kinder, gentler human being from her and our 27 years of marriage.
Congratulations. How do you renew your energy?
Bike rides. I'm a cyclist. I'm a masher. So it sounds ironic because if you're renewing energy, you shouldn't be expending it. But when I'm out and about in the hillsides or the mountains or just the straight roads, I am replenishing my soul.
It makes a lot of sense to me. I'm glad you have that. For me, it's volleyball. Is my physical exercise. I love playing volleyball.
I was a setter, so I was the one setting up
nice
playing volleyball. Yeah.
Great. Okay. And just a quick. Obviously, you've given a nice accolade to your wife there. How did you guys meet? How did your universes collide?
Yeah, she dumped me 3 times at university, and on the 4th time around, when I proposed, she said, "Well, fine. I guess I'll have to hitch up to you for life." So we met at McGill University. I was there to be, I thought, in pre-med, either a doctor or a physiotherapist, and then I realized that I couldn't stand the sight of not just blood, but my own blood. So that was a poor career decision. And I also had the epiphany, Simon, that I think I was placed on this world to help people become better versions of themselves, not get them back to their 100%, i.e. in the medical or physio professions. So yeah, I walked into the guidance office and said, "Hey, I'm not doing this anymore." And they wanted me to be an engineer. My dad, God bless him, was an engineer, so I definitely wasn't doing that. And I entered into the BA B.Ed program of McGill, of which then I got the chance to meet Denise, and as they say, that's all she wrote.
Oh, great. Delightful. Well, you have a new book, your fifth, I understand, called Work, Life, Bloom. And we're going to talk, I hope, extensively about that and some of the principles that you're trying to convey in it. I guess as a starting point, I'd love to understand what inspired it.
What's Work-Life Bloom is certainly a better title than Work-Life Doom, so that's a starter. Also, Work-Life Gloom was up there, but that fell down the wayside as well. So, fifth book, yeah, Simon. Well, obviously I'm a masochist to begin with. It also keeps me married to the aforementioned Denise, so that's good. I always have I don't know, a bee in my bonnet, a twist in my knickers, and that almost always has to do with what's going inside of our organizations. So that is a combination of would-be leaders, individual team members, leaders, executives, and the culture machinations that are happening or aren't happening as each of the books have essentially progressed upon one another from 2013, which is when book one came out, to this year, 2023, and Work-Life Bloom. In this particular case, the itch to scratch was three things. One is there really is no such thing as work-life balance. Let's not kid ourselves. And so what was behind that term, and is there something better? Is there something we should recognize? So I dug into that, pun intended, I suppose. Yeah. The second was, and I'm culpable. I mean, Simon, I'm a recovering executive at places like SAP, which is a big enterprise global IT firm, and TELUS, which is kind of like Canada's BT or Vodafone. And, I spent 20 years in seats like chief learning officer and chief envisioner, and I espouse a term that I was tricked by, and the term is employee engagement.
Right.
And so I was like, okay, if there's no such thing as work-life balance, and what the bejesus is employee engagement, I wanted to really tackle those two terms. And then a bronze medal one was bringing your most authentic or best selves to work, which I thought, what the hell is that as well? It just seems like an anachronism of 2023 and beyond. So I was like, okay, there's got to be something more to this. And so those were really the bees in the bonnet, so to say.
Oh, I love it. Well, I'd like to pick each of those.
Sure.
Before I do, because I know if I don't do this now, I won't remember to do it later. Each of my guests must answer the question: what three leadership lessons do you wish you'd learned earlier? And then some of them may link into that, of course. But let's explore that.
I touched on one of them already. Actually, like, I do believe that had I known earlier on about that adage of my network is my net worth, I would spend a heck of a lot more time not just cultivating connections and good relations, both weak ties and strong ties, but I'd nurture them over time. Like I've lost some people from 30 years ago, particularly high school and university and my first career kind of era.
Yeah.
And I can probably go back to them now, but I wish I had kept them along the way somehow. So my network is my net worth is number one. Number two, which I also kind of dovetailed a little bit on the opening, I wish I had understood better that work and life are integrated, not separate.
Yes.
And if you're an aspiring leader and you think that you can shut it down at 5 o'clock or on the weekends, I mean, that's an absolute anomaly misnomer. Like, it's not really possible. And I mean, to my chagrin, I suppose, right, Simon? I wish I had been told that, no, you have to find spaces at work and spaces in life to allow for yourself to refresh, renew, etc. But also, just realize that you're going to be thinking about work at 2 o'clock on a Saturday bike ride. And that when it's 2 o'clock on Thursday, when your school phones about one of your children, and you've got to deal with that from 2 to 6, and you can't feel guilty that life, quote, life, right, is impacting work. You got to do it. So it's not balance, it's integrated. So that's number two. And number three, I wish, Simon, that I had been not sold the bill of goods that we're supposed to be, quote, engaged all the time at our work. That's also impossible. So for years, in certain times when, an acquisition occurred, or a new boss showed up, or even a new boss's boss, and the culture changes, or there are players there that come in and sort of impact you, on a professional and personal level, your persona may drop, kind of like a little bit what we might talk about in work-life bloom. So your persona might be one in which you were, quote, blooming, but then you drop to renewal or something else. Sure. Well, why is that? And I felt guilty when these things would happen to me. I mean, I've been around the block. I'm 52, and it's perfectly okay, is my point. I wish I had known that when I was 24, 25, that you will go through cycles in your career, the ups, the flats, and the downs. Kind of like riding a bike, actually. Yeah. I should have done a bike metaphor, Simon. Idiot me, right? Jeez, what's wrong with me? I'm doing a
work-life cycle.
Yeah, work-life peloton, right? Yeah. Anyway, so those are the three. Those are three things I think I wish I had to learn when I was 20, 25, somewhere around there.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for sharing those. And clearly, a lot of that is going to link to some of the content associated with your book as well. Let's jump in immediately into this work-life balance phrase and this idea of integration as well. Why do you think the balance word has got so much stickiness?
I think there's a reason that's sinister, and there's a reason that's almost impervious or invisible. So the sinister reason first, let's go there. That's juicy. People are like, oh, I'm going to listen in for that. I'm going to stick around on this podcast. Is executives. So the sinister and the cynicism in me is that executives who espouse a well-being, a wellness, a balanced, purported balanced organizational ethos between work and life or work and home are serving up something that's arguably a lie, but they're doing it with, sort of crossing their tongue in their mouth saying, ha ha ha, we espouse work-life balance, but we know that it's impossible. And they're guilty of it. I mean, they demonstrate it by emails at 8 and texts on the weekends and freaking out that, you have to go, go for prayers on Friday if you're Muslim, for example, right? And like these things are happening day in, day out, over and over and over again, where this delineation between the executives and senior leaders are not caring about the integration of work and life, rather than them saying, oh, it's a balance. You've got balance. We've got balance. See, look at it. It's on the wall. It's one of our values. Work-life balance, Simon. See, of course, it's right there. It's when you walk in the lobby. It says, we are work-life balance. Oh.
What I'm processing, though, is could the same thing happen with integration? The same, like I could say, well, I text you on a weekend because work and life are integrated, and you need to accept that integration, that I will be texting you on a Saturday and 8 o'clock, because accept, and there'll be times where I won't do that. I'm just wondering if integration could easily replace the balance word, but just mean similar thing.
I like it. You're challenging already. This is the kind of conversation we should be having after dinner, right? We should, right. We should have whiskey or scotch or something here at some point, right? Of course you could say that. And here's sort of not the debunk the point, but it's what I've learned through the research, at least, is that there are work and life factors. And life isn't so much necessarily, Simon, about, balancing a paycheck or having a garage sale on the Saturday, right? It's not like, do I move house from Essex to Soho? Why would I do that? I don't know, but maybe one wants to. Like, it's not about those type of life decisions. They're more about self-character and the character development factors that allow us to thrive, flourish, what have you, in terms of a nice verb there. But when we are, as leaders, just looking at the work factors, and so EBITDA or customer sat or innovation and productivity and performance scores and so forth, and we lose sight of the fact that there are character or self-development factors that are going to help me at work, that's where the imbalance is. So it's not always about just the texting and when am I going to be called upon, which is important from an overall wellness perspective, of course. But it is more about what leaders are doing to understand that there's me as an individual human being, and what I need to thrive, flourish, etc., in both life and quote work. But then there are the factors at work which I need as a human being as well to be actually happening in a positive way. And if that's not happening, then I'm not going to be balanced. So the integration point, and I get it, it's a good challenge. But the integration point there is not to sort of say, oh, well, work-life balance can be masked as work-life integration, and leaders can do the same thing now by texting, whatever, on the weekends, whatever. Although I get it, it's not as curt or as simple as that. It's more about, well, what happens to each of us when I'm thinking about myself individually versus myself at work, and my work on an individual basis as well.
Thank you. And you talk about these work factors and the life factors. I know there's 12 in total that you write about. Which of those, we probably don't have time to go through each one. Which of those would you like to talk about that perhaps you see less, or either you aren't talking about it as frequently as you'd like on other interviews that you do, or that you think that business leaders should be paying a little bit more attention, that might be a little bit below the radar? Do you get a sense of my question?
Yeah. So you're right. There's 6 work factors, 6 life factors. So this all was discovered through about 18 months of research with about 10,000 people around the world in 11 different countries, and from individual contributors, just young kind of leaders, right? Early on in their career, mid-management, and then executives. And one of the work factors that kept popping up was strategy. And strategy is one of those things where, well, first of all, senior leaders think it's up to them, and arguably the buck stops with them. But when you're not sort of involving and or communicating or consulting or connecting with others on what the strategy is, and you as a human being lose sight of that. Let's say you're an upcoming leader. Here we are, after dinner leadership, right? You're an up and coming leader. If you don't know what's going on with the strategy, you're not consulted upon, no one's communicating the updates, no one really connects with you on where we're going, and you're left there as an up and coming leader, if not just a kind of a young leader, trying to figure it out for yourself. That's a work factor that can go awry very quickly, because there you are with a team of 6 or 8, and you're just young leader, and you don't really have the muscles yet, emotionally, socially, intellectually, to sort of infer what the strategy is, to infer then where it's going, what changes need to be made or are coming. But your job is to translate strategy to your team so that they see the bigger picture, why they're in their roles, their individual contributor roles, why they're there at this organization. So if the leader's leader is not doing that communication or consulting or connection of strategy to that leader, get what happens then? There's confusion. And so what you need as a work factor is not confusion, but clarity in strategy. So there's one exactly where it's so incumbent upon the leader's leader, even the leader's leader, skip up level leaders is what I call it, right? That if they're communicating, consulting, and connecting what the strategy is all about, then what you have is an insurance about what the short and long-term focus is, what the objectives are, what's going right and wrong, upcoming opportunities, heads up moments, so that there's clarity. And if you're in the dark, Simon, then quickly one of those 6 work factors, in this case strategy, just falls by the wayside. And you get a lot of that, when people cross their arms and they're sitting down in a chair, and the sound they make is basically this. It's humph. They're basically there. They're like, how come I don't understand or don't know what's going on around here? Or how am I not asked about? Why am I not asked about what's going on? So that might help, feedback and input towards what the strategy may go. It's a huge missing piece. Yeah. So what's the sign here? What's the lesson, Simon? If leaders were to do a better job above their leaders, so meaning a vice president with its directors with its managers with its team leads, the whole continuum of the hierarchy of leadership in any organization, if that one above or the skip level up were to be clearer on communicating, consulting, and connecting with what the strategy is all about, it just makes life so much easier for everyone below them. So, get on with it, as we say in England.
Great. I love that. And what would be one of the life factors? Just to complete this, I mean, people should read the book to find out the full story here, I'm sure. But so we got trust, belonging, valued, purpose, strategy, and norms. And you've talked to strategy. If we look at the 6 life factors, we've got relationship, skills, meaning, well-being, agency, and respect. So again, could you do a similar thing for one of the life factors? Which of those do you see as perhaps under the radar?
It's a good question. And I think what I'll pick up on is skills. Mm-hmm. And because people might say, well, what do you mean, Dan? Skills, obviously, skills development, that's got to be a work factor. And I argue, actually, what you're doing as a leader from the skills life factor is you're taking an interest in the overarching human being. And that means that you're there to help them grow. And if you're there to help them grow, it's not selfishly for work. You're actually helping them grow as a human being. So it's a life factor that has the added benefit and bonus of being found and driven inside of an organization. So the skills that you develop and the sort of the aptitude gained basically to perform confidently at work and in life is what a skills factor is effectively. And what I found, and Novartis is actually a really, really great example. So this big pharma company, big headquarters in London, also in Switzerland as well. And they do some very interesting things. They have what they call a skills-based ethos or skills-based operating system, the SBOS. And this skills-based operating system is saying, look, we care about you as a human being, and we want you to grow. We hope you stay here, but we're perfectly fine with you going on to another organization because we care about you as a human being. That takes a lot of guts, gumption, and leadership to say we care about you as a human being. We'd love you to stay, but for your time here, we're going to develop you. And what organizations I've noticed who really care about this life factor of skills, they do a few things. One is lateral hopping, I call it. And lateral hopping is allowing short-term kind of stints, almost like we used to call them, you and I are of a certain vintage, Simon. We used to call them, job rotations. Yep. Even in the apprenticeship model in England and Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, there's this apprenticeship model that allows you to kind of go from one apprentice to another. You kind of spend 3 months with one person and 3 months with another. Well, lateral hopping is saying inside an organization, hey, why don't I have a 3-month stint in marketing? I know I'm in IT, but that wouldn't it be cool to work over there and see what's going on? Or if I'm in sales and I could work in HR, why not? So that you could get a little bit of out of your comfort zone and also feel what's going on, but doing some good work. It's not just, walking around with a lantern and finding the darkness and the crevices in the hallways. You're there to actually learn and make networks and connections. So that's one. How do we find ways in which to build up the development of self, the character of self, thus skills factor in the life factor one is one that benefits both life and then in work.
Fantastic. And how do you know when you're blooming? And I'm talking specifically to you, Dan. We've got these factors that you've mentioned. You talk about blooming is the target zone, if I've understood it right,
sure,
in terms of this work-life bloom. What are signs for you that you're in that blooming quadrant?
Well, the model itself, if people were to think of a 2x2 matrix, so I've written 5 books and none of them ever had a 2x2 matrix. So I figured I was overdue for a 2x2, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean,
have to. Yeah.
Kind of business book author am I without a 2x2? So I felt like I just had to rejoin the club. I was being kicked out by
Congratulations.
my luminaries, exactly. So the y-axis, that's the one on the left, people, that's work, and the x-axis, the one on the bottom, that's life. So the model we put together to test this was putting the 6 work factors on the y-axis and the 6 life factors on the x, and the 2x2 is 4 personas, which is where kind of introduction maybe, 20 minutes ago, where I was talking about I can't stand the term employee engagement, because what Aon Hewitt or Gallup or Great Place to Work, Blessing Way, bless them all these quote engagement companies are trying to tell leaders that everyone should be engaged all the time. Or they're saying, hey, your culture stinks, you're doing things wrong. Here's what you need to do so that people can become engaged all the time. It's impossible, Simon. So in that 2x2 matrix, on the top right, if work is amazing and life is clear, so the life skills, the life factors, and the work factors, that's blooming. And blooming just basically means you have 5 or 6 of each of the work and life factors in a positive way. So that means that trust feels pretty good on the work factor, but so do 4 others or more. And then the life ones, right? So skills we talked about, and 4 of the other 5 remaining are in a positive net score. So I've been blooming when my meaning, my relationships, etc., the 5 or 6 of the life factors are going pretty well, and the 5 or 6 of the work factors are going really well. When I started a new initiative at TELUS. So I was for 5 or 6 years chief learning officer. And then I pitched my CEO and my COO this idea. I was blooming, by the way, so I was doing it, but I needed to, I felt like I was about to get stale. So I pitched this new business idea. And at the same time, I was going through something that was like, because we had moved house and we moved city. We moved from Vancouver to Victoria. So my network was diminished. My whole kind of circle of living in Vancouver to Victoria changed. So my relationships, even my well-being started to drop with my life factors. And I'm like, God, I'm not really feeling great around here. And I pitched this idea, which they accepted, and I should be excited at work. But my sense of belonging changed because I went from a team of about 50 to 4. I didn't feel valued anymore because I went from HR to sales. And I was like, oh God, I'm this idiot that's going around here. And my whole sense of norms changed, which was another one of the work factors. So I precipitously dropped over basically a 3-month period from blooming to renewal, which is one of those 4 personas in the bottom left. So my work factors kind of fell to around the awful category, and my life factors fell from clear to being very confused. So here's a guy who's blooming, doing great, but then because of 2 different things happening concurrently at the same time, moving to Victoria, my change of scenery, a whole bunch of things happened, and a pitched new gig where I went from being CLO to something else, and it was my own doing.
Sure.
But I fell. And I had to dig, I guess pun intended again, dig my way out of renewal. And with a boss that was supportive and a boss's boss that was supportive, over time, I found my way inching back after a stop, ultimately in being stunted, which is one of the other personas, where life was starting to come back together. My sense of skills and relationships and meaning was coming back. Wasn't quite there yet on the work side. So I was kind of in the bottom right quadrant, moving from renewal to stunted. And then, 6 or so months later, I found myself way back up to blooming. So, Simon, I'm an example. And there's millions of workers out there, people, leaders and non-leaders, up and coming aspiring leaders like those that listen to this wonderful show of yours, that you've got to understand. You'll never be engaged all the time. You'll never be blooming all the time. But what you have to do is almost like an audit on where are you at with your work and life factors. And more importantly, have that conversation with your leader. And if you're a leader, have those conversations with your team members, because it's perfectly fine.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say, because the way that I read the book is targeted at the leader, thinking about their team. I mean, you can look at this as an individual read, but it feels like it's targeted at the leader, thinking about how they get the best from, or reading this in their team members. Have you got any suggestions targeted at them and how they best conduct that type of audit that you mentioned?
Yeah, it all comes down to really, a couple tests. So what I cheekily call the soil test and the water test. So a soil test is basically you having these continual scanned audits or conversations, ultimately what they are, about where they sit in their current work-life trajectory. So having conversations about trust and belonging and meaning and skills and relationships, like just having these open-ended conversations and maybe tracking them, i.e. tracking what the results of those conversations were to see where people are. I have a couple, like, basically templates for you to kind of think about, but yeah, sure, but it's about the conversation. So that's what a soil test is. You're doing a pH balance test where your crops grow or not. And so if you have terrible pH, as the gardeners will know, you have stunted growth or like slightly budding growth that never really blooms. Or you might be in renewal and having to change out all the soil itself because the pH balance is completely off. So that's what it is, Simon. It's about those conversations, the scanning, and it's okay to have these types of chats, frankly.
And what's the water test?
That's you. So the gardener waters the soil. And so if you metaphorically are water, you're regularly testing your own recognition of how you can apply changes to those work-life factors, or invest or recommend changes in those work-life factors for the team members, but as you alluded to, maybe for yourself. Yes, the book is written and the subtitle says how to nurture a team that flourishes, but there's a surreptitious point in the book that is, well, gosh darn, Simon, we better take a look in the mirror as well, right?
Yeah, I agree. I love that. A few years ago, I was listening to a guy speak. He was involved in real estate with a specialism in farming. And it was the first time I came across a term, regenerative farming. And a lot of the stuff that I previously heard of was around sustainable farming, which I guess is about minimizing the impact and pollution and these type of things, I guess the green agenda. But it was the first time I'd heard about regenerative farming, and it triggered, he was talking literally about farming. My mind went to leadership then. It's like, oh, that's interesting. You're talking about the soil health, how to build soil health and within the farm itself. And it felt like going right back to more primeval farming methods, actually, from what I understood. And you can tell from my language, I'm certainly not a farmer, but it feels like there's a nice connection to this point that you're making. It's like, how do we help the soil health to get the right bloom come through, that pH balance that you referred to? What can we do to help that? And I guess there's something about the individual doing stuff for themselves, and then there's a leader, me, contributing to that as well. There's a question there somewhere. I don't know. What's your thoughts on regenerative farming?
Well, I'll say this first.
The links.
Before I answer that, you're spot on, and the metaphor really comes to this: the leader is not in charge of one's garden box. So if I were your leader, Simon, you have your garden box. I'm there to help you bloom, but I'm not there to plant, to necessarily rechange the pH balance. I'm there to water. Right? And so metaphorically, leaders are there to help and to nurture, but not be solely responsible. And so this is kind of the dance that I want people to recognize. As they always say, right? You can't lead, the fishermen to fish. You can teach them to fish, right? You can't fish for them. And so I can't make you bloom. I can point out and create certain conditions and help you see and assess what it is that may be going wrong with the pH balance in your soil. Maybe I can give you some water every now and then. That's where these factors come in, of course. But it really has a lot to do with how you interpret those work-life factors, and whether you think if you're renewal, budding, stunted, or in a bloom state. That's part of the thing before I get to regenerative, is that if you have a team of 10, I guarantee you that 4 of the 10 are blooming and 6 are not.
Yeah.
And that, Simon, like a year from now, whilst you're blooming today, you might be in budding or stunted or renewal a year from now because things change. Just like my little story about moving from Vancouver to Victoria and changing my job. That's happening day in and day out. So what do I think of regenerative farming? That's the exact metaphor of what's happening inside organizations. We are in a constant state of change. You know, as Churchill said, to improve is to change, but to be perfect is to change often. And what does he mean by that? Perfection's impossible. Remember, the ultimate goal here is about learning and change. So when we fall off of the blooming state, we drop to renewal or what have you, it's still learning. We're learning about ourselves, and the boss, the leader, needs to be having those soil tests, those conversations with the team member to help them see why the pH is off or why they might be stunted. Like it's not giving them the fish, right? To mix a metaphor, it's teaching them to fish.
Yeah, it's interesting because as I've reflected on this, I've felt the leader had some responsibility for the soil condition, you know, the soil health as we were talking about, and you know, as I'm working through. But that's an interesting perspective of actually that sitting more with the individual themselves. And I guess the quality of the water can impact soil health, of course.
Yeah, oh, totally. Right?
Yeah. But there's something about individuals having their own responsibility to it's the word manage, you know, look after these things in themselves and be mindful of those things themselves. That's a nice perspective. I like that shared individual responsibility and accountability as well as leader inputs.
It's exactly that. Like any garden has inputs. So it's the gardener, it's the seed, it's the sun, it's the soil, it's the water, right? It's any other nutrients that you're going to feed it that might help a budding plant become blooming and so forth. So this whole metaphor around the garden box is that if a garden were to be left to its own devices, it may flourish. But there's probably a greater chance of it flourishing if there's a gardener that's there to help tend to the garden. So that's the metaphor I'm trying to get at here is we are all our own gardeners. But when it comes to the leader team member relationship, gosh, is it a lot easier to bloom if the gardener and the leader in this case is helping nourish? Sure thing. Like, come on.
Yeah. Great. Oh, very, very interesting. That's good. And so somebody who picks up this book, you know, got a variety of different options in front of them as they go into Barnes and Noble. Is that
Waterstone? Yeah,
Waterstones in Canada. I don't know. Why should they pick this up? What is it that you'd love for them to say? Hey, I need to grab this because.
I think what I'm trying to do ultimately is to debunk those two kind of key terms I mentioned up front, right? Yeah. Work-life balance and employee engagement. Leaders have been serving these two nonsensical terms up for years. And the whole point here is that interaction, relationship, the rapport between leader and team. And each of us, however, are individuals, i.e. back to the garden metaphor of the plants or the things in the garden, but it's much easier to bloom when you've got somebody that's paying attention to those factors. And if you have a boss, a leader, if you're an up-and-coming aspiring leader, imagine having these types of conversations about meaning and well-being, whether that's emotional, social, physical, financial. Imagine have a conversation, about do you feel respected? Like, what's the level of respect you feel when you come into work and when you leave work? How do you feel like you belong here? Whether you're BIPOC, whatever your skin color is, your nationality, your identity, do you feel understood? Do you feel represented and safe? And what are we trying to get to here? I come from a for-profit, publicly traded business world. And so I'm guided by the fact that I know, I'm not naive, I know that society works on growth. So if growth is the goal, and I'm not suggesting it should be, by the way, I'm just saying that's what is out there. Yeah, could we possibly reinvent the way in which we're thinking and acting around work-life balance and employee engagement so that if growth is the goal for the organization, I should say, then maybe we can do something slightly kinder, gentler, humane with our team members who are supposedly working together with you to reach and actualize the goals of the organization from a growth perspective. And if it's public sector or not-for-profit, growth's a little bit different, obviously, but nonetheless, it's still the same mechanism. How do we grow, whether it's our membership, whether it's the initiatives we're doing in public sector for community or federal politics, et cetera? All of it is kind of machinated up the same way.
Yeah. I was going to pull this to a close, but I've got another element of the metaphor I just want to explore with you, which is seasons.
Yeah.
And again, where my mind's going with this thought pattern is blooming. Am I likely then to be blooming for long periods of time, or will I be going to, almost in cycles? There's this sort of sense of maybe because recovery and winter kind of kicks in, and maybe I drop some of the flowers and the likes, and then there's a period of kind of preparing for the next stage of growth. I work a lot in metaphor in my mind, and that's where I'm going. Any thoughts on how long I could stay in a blooming state in reality, or do I need to actually come back to those other phases you've talked to be able to then properly bloom into another season of growth?
Gosh, you're spot on. Thank you, Simon, for the question, because it's actually twofold answer. Threefold. So the first answer is yeah. So the point about seasons is that they don't last. They are in, generally speaking, 3-month cycles. That's not the same for what work-life bloom means. You could be blooming for years because all the factors are in your favor. And then again, all of a sudden, some things start to happen with you, with your work, or both. And they start affecting, what it is that you think about from the work factors and life factors. So as soon as you start dropping from amazing to semi-awful to awful at work, and those were extraneous and or internal factors happening to you from a work perspective, well, you're not going to bloom. The cycle has changed and the season is over. So you're like, geez, that doesn't feel good. I just went from summer to winter. Overnight it felt. That's cold. Now, the second part to the answer, or the third, I should say now, is that there are extraneous events that occur. So we're no stranger these days to heat domes and fires and cyclones and tropical storms and hurricanes and so forth, right? That's the fact of our newfound climate disaster lifestyles. So if you take that metaphor, so you got seasons, which you're spot on with, Simon, and you take the second kind of metaphor with the events,
yes,
you're going to have events in your life and at work. So a death in the family, that might break you from a sense of how you feel belonging, or how your well-being is, or your sense of meaning or agency has changed. Like, it can just decimate you if a very dear loved one all of a sudden is shockingly gone. If as I alluded to earlier, an acquisition occurs that was unbeknownst to you, and all of a sudden you wake up on Monday morning and you've been acquired by a company that you've spent 7 years calling your competitor, and all of a sudden now you're in bed with them thinking, oh my gosh. And then over the next 6 months, you realize that the boss you've had for 5 years, who was awesome, named Simon, obviously, and now you've got Jill, and Jill is a jerk. So these extraneous events can occur, just like the tornado, the cyclone, and the heat dome. Sure. And that can really affect your cycle or your persona. So all of it, metaphorically, from the kind of weather and seasons perspective, all can be used as a leader, right? Just as a way to almost guide them in thinking, well, where do people stand in these particular situations?
Yeah. Love it. Thank you, Dan. Really appreciate that. And if someone wants to find out more and get into this a little bit more, how do they get in contact with you?
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess I should say, first of all, there's a free assessment if people wanted to take the work-life assessment that we ran across 10,000 people. So if you go to worklifebloom.com, that'll get you to basically the site for the book and all the things about it. And worklifebloom.com/assessment gets you a free assessment and tells you where you are right now, take it 6 months from now, it'll probably change, and 12 months later, it'll probably change, and that's okay. Remember, you're here for a short time, and your cycles will change, and it's totally okay. Don't think you need to be blooming today. I hope that you have conversations with your leader, and I hope if you're a leader, you have conversations with your team about those factors. But please, if you're in renewal, stunted, or budding, please don't take that as a detriment on your character or who you are. It's all okay, Simon.
Thank you. Thank you. That's good. And I've taken some really helpful insights today. I've already kind of vocalized one, but that's going to stick with me. It's just the ownership of the soil. It's kind of challenged my visual kind of thinking around this idea of the plant and what blooming means and whose responsibility where that sits. So thank you for that, amongst other things. I'm interested, Dan, what's been a takeaway for you today as you've vocalized some stuff I'm sure you've spoken at length about before, but what's been something that resonates for you today?
Well, first of all, I wanted to say thank you. You were not just well prepared, but I loved how even at the end, you could see your mind twirling and you thought about the seasons. And so far, as you launch a book, you do a few conversations with people around the world. No one's come up with that yet. And it's in the book, and that's fine. But the point is, that's key. Like, no, it's not a 12-month cycle, but the cycles of the seasons is exactly what I want people to think about. You cannot be in summer. As much as I love summer, a lot better cycling in summer than there is in winter, I must say, Simon. But I know that if I don't cycle in winter, when it's rainy and it feels a lot like Manchester in January is terrible for a guy like me, it's just like that in Victoria. It's just wet and terrible. Yeah. But I go out and I do it because I know that eventually I'm going to cycle out of winter and it's going to be summer again. So that metaphor to me, Simon, thank you. I'm glad you brought it up.
Pleasure. Really great to speak with you and to learn more about your thinking, and it's enhanced my thinking on leadership. I'm sure it will help many others too. And I wish you the very best of success with Work Life Bloom going forward. And I hope this isn't the last conversation we have. I look forward to another one. Maybe sounds like you're on a 2-year cycle of writing. So let's speak again when you come out with book number 6.
I love it, and thank you so much, Simon. Indeed, I will. Great. Appreciate it.
Great, thank you. Our after dinner leadership conversation is finished. Our guest has left, and you're still here. Now, of course, you're very welcome. I'm glad that you found the conversation to be engaging. There's a few things that I'd like to ask you to do before you do leave. The first one of those is if you can stop and think about somebody who you think would enjoy this conversation, a friend, a colleague, perhaps an aspiring leader. The second thing is to stop and hit subscribe or follow. And then the third thing is to start doing something. Perhaps there's a little idea or a concept that we've been discussing today that you think you could apply even a little bit tomorrow, tonight, and to put it into action. I encourage you to use this as a catalyst to do something different, do something more interesting, do something more exciting. And thank you so much for joining us. And please tune in again for another after dinner leadership conversation. You can leave now. I need to go and do the dishes.